This is week 1 of learning new homesteading skills every week for a year. This week, we're making butter. We're going to dump a jar of thickened cream in a mixing bowl. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a dairy cow or goats on my tiny homestead, so I'm just using good old supermarket cream. And now, all we need to do is whip that baby up. And now we have your regular old whipped cream. But that's not what we want, so we're going to keep whipping. And whip it some more. Give it a little scrapey scrape for good measure. And whip it even more. And more. You know you're getting real close when it starts to get lumpy like that. And then we just keep whipping until you end up with buttermilk splashing all over your kitchen. Probably should have turned the mixer down to low at the lumpy stage. And voila! We have butter. But we're not done yet. We need to strain it through a fine sieve. Make sure to use the high-tech spatchy spatch to get all of that deliciousness out of your whisk. Then we've got to get our hands in there and squeeze the life out of our butter. That silky buttermilk goodness will cause your butter to go bad a lot faster if it's left in. Now, we torture it with an ice bath. Keep smushing it around in the water until your fingers decide that they no longer like you. Then we chuck it on some baking paper. This is where you could spread it out and mix some salt into it, but I'm not going to do that because I'm lazy. Then we try our absolute hardest to shape it into something that roughly resembles a block of butter. Now we wrap it up like a good little present. And into the fridge it goes. There we have it. We've successfully made butter and some buttermilk. What homesteading skill should I try next? Comment below. This is week 2 of learning a new homesteading skill every week for a year. And this week, we're making cheese. I believe what we're making is considered cottage cheese, but please do correct me if I'm wrong. Alright, we're going to grab ourselves a large pot that has a lid. I'm using my Dutch oven. We're going to dump 2 litres or around half a gallon of full-fat, unhomogenized milk into it. You can also use raw milk if you're lucky enough to have some available, but that isn't a luxury I have. Urban homesteads and dairy cows don't mix very well. Now it's time to turn the heat up. We want to put our pot of milk on the stove on a medium heat. We do not want this to boil. And now we're going to gently stir this every so often with our little spatchy spatch. We want this milk to get to 85 degrees Celsius or 185 Fahrenheit. Now, I don't have a regular probe thermometer or a fancy infrared one. I just have this probe meat thermometer that you can only set to meat temperatures, so I'm going to use that. So we're going to keep stirring and checking and stirring and checking. And then we're going to take the probe out because this thing beeps when it hits 78 degrees and that sound is so annoying. Now once it hits 85 degrees, we want to turn it off. Next, we're going to add about half a tablespoon of salt and stir it up until it dissolves. Now, we're going to add a couple of tablespoons of vinegar and watch it start to separate while we stir it in. And now we have to wait. Patience is a virtue, my friend. While we wait though, we can get a bowl, a sieve, and a few layers of cheesecloth ready. Now that we've waited for what feels like the longest 20 minutes of our lives, let's take a peek. Look at that, we've got some curds and whey. This is when the fluffy gremlins will appear because they think they have a rite of passage whenever milk is involved. Now we're going to go grab that pot, making sure that we're using oven mitts because it will still be hot. Now let's drain out that whey. This is the part where you realize that you have gravely underestimated the amount of liquid there was going to be. And now we've got to wipe up the huge mess we made, while beating yourself up because you had a she'll be right moment when you chose the bowl. Now that we have the correct size bowl, let's make the transfer. Now we're going to let that drain, but soon realize that we definitely put too many layers of cheesecloth in there. So we're going to switch to a colander, and because patience is a virtue we do not have, we give in and start squeezing it out with our hands. Now we're going to let that sit. The longer we leave this sit, the drier and firmer it's going to get. I left mine for about 20 minutes. Now we're going to add a dollop of Greek yogurt to this cheese, and it's ready to enjoy. Don't forget to bottle up your whey. There we go, we've successfully made cottage cheese. What should I make next? Let me know in the comments. This is week 3 of learning a new homesteading skill every week for a year. And this week, we're making jam. My sister-in-law gifted me this large basket of cherry plums, so we're going to be making plum jam. We're going to grab ourselves 8 8-ounce canning jars with seals and lids. I'm using the ball ones because they're my absolute favourite at the moment. I have an Amazon link in my bio if you need jars. We're also going to need a water bath canner, or in my case, a very large pot with a cake cooling rack in the bottom. Our first step is to sterilise the jars, so we're going to fill that pot up pretty full with water. Then we're going to gently put our jars in there. We want to have at least an inch of water above the jars. Now we're going to forget to chuck the lid on and bring that to a boil twice as slow as it should be. While we wait for those jars to sterilise, let's get started on our jam. We're going to thoroughly wash our fruit. And then we get to rip out their little hearts by quartering them and pitting them. Then we realise how tedious this is going to be because our sister-in-law grows tiny fruit instead of normal sized plums. These are called cherry plums for a reason. The best way I found to do it was by rolling them under the knife, but please be careful when you do this. And then we rip out the seed by twisting the flesh. Now we're going to measure out our progress and realise we're not even halfway done. We only have 3 cups and we need 8. So we're going to keep pitting and quartering. This is when we realise we've lost count and have to measure it all again. And 7 full years later, we have 8 cups of plums. Now it's time to measure out a boatload of sugar. We need 6 cups. Seriously though, there is a ton of sugar in jam. We're also going to need 1.5 cups of water and 1/4 cup of lemon juice. Now we're going to put a large pot on high heat and add all of those ingredients. Now it's time to break out our favourite spatchy spatch and give it a stir. We're going to want to keep an eye on this and stir it often. We want that sugar to melt and the jam to thicken. While that jam is doing its thing, let's sterilise some lids by boiling them in some water for 10 minutes. And we're going to make sure that we don't forget to stir our jam. Now we don't want all these lumpy bits, so we're going to get out the potato masher, and then we're going to realise we made a grave mistake. This is when we turn the heat down for a moment and turn to Google for answers. Turns out if you chuck a dollop of butter in, it will stop the bubbles. And now we're going to switch to the other potato masher, because the first one was too short and burnt our hand. Now we've gotten rid of all the large lumpy bits. Now we're going to test our jam's consistency. We can do this with a plate and a spoon. To do this, we're going to scoop out a dollop of jam, drop it on the plate and scrape the spoon through it. If the tunnel quickly fills back up, your jam is not ready. Now we're going to remember that water boils a lot faster when it has a lid on it. Now we're going to check our jam. This is the consistency we want it to be. Let's turn the heat off. Let's check on our jars. The water is at a rolling boil now, which means that the jars need to sit in it for at least 10 minutes. While we wait for the jars, let's get everything else ready. We're going to put our jam on the table along with a tea towel to put our jars on. And we can't forget those sterilised lids. Now let's transfer our jars from the pot to the tea towel. Now it's time to funnel the jam into them. We need to leave a 1/4 inch gap below the rim. Now we get to put all our lids on. But then we're going to remember that we forgot to wipe them down, so we're going to take all the lids off again. Now we're going to wipe the lids and the rims of the jar with a damp piece of paper towel. And put all the lids back on again. This time adding the rings. We want these rings to be finger tight. Now we put these jars back in the water bath canner, ensuring there is 1 to 2 inches of water above them. And we want to bring that to a boil. This time we're going to remember to put the lid on. If there's any jam left over, you can just put that in a regular jar and treat it like an open jar of jam. Once we have a rolling boil, our processing time can begin. For me, because I'm below 1,000 feet above sea level, that was only 5 minutes. Once your jars have sat in the rolling boiling water for the right amount of time, we turn the heat off. And now we're going to carefully pull out our jars, put them on a clean tea towel and let them sit out for 12 to 24 hours without touching them. And we're going to get water all over the floor in the process. Once it's been 12 to 24 hours, we can remove the rings and check the seals. You can do this by pushing your finger down on top and making sure that it doesn't make a popping sound, and by running your finger around the rim. We need to check all of our jars. We also don't want to store these with the rings on them. And don't forget to label and date them. There we go, we've successfully made plum jam. What should I make next? Let me know in the comments.